working overtime. My name is Corinne Chronopoulos. I'm the library director here at the Peterborough Town Library. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight, for caring about who you vote for, and for being here. The public library is a great venue for this event because our job, our mission, other than championing literacy, is to provide you all with the resources and information that you need to make up your mind, right? About all kinds of issues and topics. So we're really happy to host tonight so that you can learn from these fine folks and decide how you feel about their point of view. I want to thank our moderators, Zoe Groten-Heisman and Christy Loretto. They have volunteered their time tonight to prepare the questions and to moderate, so thank you to them and their organization, Go Vedanta. And lastly, I want to thank all three of our candidates. They've all already served in office, so thank you for your time. We know that you contribute a lot of your own resources, that you drive a lot, and that it's often a thankless job. So we do thank you for representing us and for running again.
Thank you, Corinne, and thank you again for our candidates for being here. We're going to start tonight with opening statements, which are limited to 2 minutes. Corinne is over here as timekeeper. You'll be provided a 15-second warning with the yellow paddle, and then another reminder with the white circle when time is up. And so we'll begin with challenger Ivy Van.
Thank you. I think so. Oh yes, I do have a microphone. I'm Ivy Van, and as Corinne alluded to, I have served in the House already. I served 4 terms between 2014 and 2022, and I am running to go back to the House because I think there are a lot of things that are important to do at the state government level. There are things that are best done there. And one of the things that I think about a lot is the whole idea of, human rights. Things like, what are our rights and how are they being preserved or not preserved? And how does our government fit into that? I consider bodily autonomy to be a human right. I think housing and healthcare are human rights. I think the ability to gather in public without fear of firearm violence is a human right. And when I was in the House, I was a reliable voter for those things, sometimes successfully and sometimes not. But I cast my vote to support those rights as a member of the House, and I would do so again were I to be sent back. One of the reasons that I'd like to go back is that one of those human rights I just mentioned is housing. And housing is a huge issue in the United States as a whole, in New Hampshire, and in the Monadnock region. And for better or worse, I think that there are tacks that the state can take to improve the ability of places to create more housing availability and housing choice. And since that's what I do in my day job, I'd like to go back to the House and work on that again. I'm also interested in issues that affect how we live our ordinary lives. Healthcare is one of them. Childcare is another one. We know that the state of New Hampshire is aging. And thinking about both ends of the spectrum is really important. How do we provide care for elders, and how do we provide care for children? Are both things that I think bear looking at and that I'm interested in how that plays out at the state level. Did I make it?
Thank you. Jonah Wheeler.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Corinne, for opening up the historic 1833 road for us. That's a joke, it's not actually that good. But my name is Jonah Orion Wheeler. I was born in a bathtub in Keene on March 1st, 2003, to an incredible single mother, Rebecca Ann Wheeler, who has worked at, I think, maybe every restaurant in this region, and you might have been served by her. I grew up working class in this state. I know what it's like to have to live off the social services. I know what it's like to be in housing crisis. I remember living in the woods of Greenville in what was called Hippie Hollow at the time. I think it's still there. It was a tent community with a teepee in the middle of it that we lived in the woods of in the summer of, I think, 2007. And then we moved to Seattle with my grandmother, who was a travel nurse at the time, moved to Maine, and then back to Peterborough, New Hampshire, where we have been ever since. I grew up here at PES. I went to SMS. I went to Conval. Very lucky to go to the Conval School District, because that district has property-rich towns. And as we're going to get into in this debate, this state funds education in an unequitable way, which leaves property-poor districts having to fight for funding. I know that firsthand. I had friends that went to the Conant School District, and they came out of high school 4 steps behind my peers in Conval because they didn't have the same programs, the same services, and the same opportunities available to them living in the Conant School District. I ran for office 2 years ago because I know what it's like to be working class in the state. Because the government of the state of New Hampshire is not working for everybody within the state. Because I, in office, knew that I could do the job 100% to the best of my ability, and that the voice of the working class was not in the legislature right now. I went up to the State House, and I passed 23 pieces of legislation through the House in my freshman term, 15 of which also passed the Senate onto the governor's desk, 12 of which are signed into law now. And that included legislation which we're going to get into, like 1583, funding our public schools, 1666, addressing lobbyist income, and much more, like hair-based discrimination. So I thank you for being here. It's really amazing to see how many people show up to know who their state representative is. And I thank Corinne for opening the library, and I look forward to this very thorough debate that we're going to have here today.
Thank you, Jonah. And Peter Leishman.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank you all for showing up. I guess it's going to be a good show because the place is packed. So hopefully we'll provide some good answers for your questions. So I'm going to be finishing my 12th term in the New Hampshire House. I presently serve. Thank you. I presently serve as the chair of Division 1 on the Finance Committee, which oversees 41 agencies in different branches of government. I'm the only Democratic chair in the Republican House. I have a long reputation of working with both sides. I've served in that role both as a Democrat in a democratically controlled House and, as you know, a Republican-controlled House now. I've been somewhat successful because of my long-term relationships with both Democrats and Republicans in the House to pass the New Hampshire Health Protection Plan. I was one of the sponsors of that. Granted State Advantage, which also provides tens of thousands of people that can't afford health insurance. Recently was successful after almost 11 years of trying to overturn actions by Speaker O'Brien back in 2011 that took away benefits from retirees, state police, local police, and firemen. That appropriation was $26 million. It was signed by the governor a few weeks ago. So I've had some very good successes, and I hope to continue with that. Thank you.
We'll now begin our first round. The questions in this round are directed at all 3 candidates, and all of you will have the opportunity to answer in turn. If at any point any of you wishes to respond directly to something one of your opponents has said, please raise your paddle, and 30-second responses will be granted at our discretion in which to do so. Answers to the first 2 questions will have a limit of 90 seconds.
Aside from housing, which we will cover in a moment, what do you believe is the greatest issue facing the people of Peterborough and Sharon in 2024, and how do you seek to address that issue in the next legislative term? We'll start with Peter.
Thanks. Probably the funding of public education. I I recently received, again, the endorsement of the New Hampshire NEA because of my support for public education. The state does not obviously do enough. One of our biggest problems is funding to support education. Unfortunately, we've seen some reduction in the number of areas of revenue for the state. The interest and dividends tax has been eliminated at the end of this year, which will eliminate about $185 million. So the state is going to certainly struggle finding the additional money to run the state, but where are we going to find the money for public education? I'm completely against vouchers. This is... As you know, this takes money away from our public schools, and there's little, if any, oversight where this money is going. I think the last appropriation was nearly $30 million a year, which that money should be coming to our public schools, both our charter schools and our traditional public schools, but it shouldn't be going to private schools or homeschool.
Ivy?
Well, you can tell that we are all Democrats at this table because, yes, that is, in fact, I would agree that the most important thing facing us, besides housing, is the question of how to fund schools. And funding it the way we are now is inequitable, both within our district and within the state as a whole. It's important for us to think about how are we going to get revenue to correct that. Right now, we do have the statewide education tax, I've left out whatever the P is, and but unfortunately that money doesn't go to every place. It stays where it's raised by and large. And it's just not fair. It's not okay to do it the way we're doing it. Your zip code should not have that outsized effect on the education that you receive. And yeah, part of the problem is that over the years of Republican leadership, various taxes have been cut. The one that business taxes have been cut, interest and dividend taxes have been cut, and where are we going to make up that money?
I 100% agree with what's been said, and I'm going to add on to it the environment. But first, before I do that, let me just say, I know the education funding issue firsthand, and that's why, despite what I was told by leadership in this issue, I proposed raising the base adequacy amount. Leadership wanted to wait. They wanted to moderate. Not the time, they told me. I said, no, it is the time. I just went through public school. I know how inequitable the funding is for my friends in Conan, for my friends across this state. So I proposed 1583, despite them telling me not to. And you know what happened? We got a bipartisan coalition of legislators together to have a special committee around education funding, and we found $205 million for our public schools in this biennium. We got that legislation through the House on a landmark bipartisan basis, and because of the right-wingers in the Senate, they moved to study that legislation. But I'm very passionate about coming back to the legislature next year to fight for that legislation and to get it across the line in the Senate. Now, I also wanted to mention the environment because when I'm out at the doors, that's what I'm hearing all the time. People are saying to me that the leaders in the state and across this country are not addressing the environment, whether it be the disruption of the climate that we're seeing, or the fact that Casella and other multinational corporations are trying to bring in trash to our state, building landfills in the North Country. I fought extraordinarily hard. I went up on the floor and got yelled at by the speaker for talking about what Casella was doing to our state. But I'm up there to fight for the people of New Hampshire, to fight for our clean air and our clean water, and I think education, environment, and housing, which we're not allowed to talk about in this answer, are the three very most important issues that I see at the doors.
Thank you, Jonah. And these answers actually make the segue to the next question very easy. All of you are on record, in fact, right here in this debate already, as opposing education freedom accounts. With the popularity and the increasing popularity of the EFA program among Granite Staters, and indeed residents of Peterborough and Sharon, reflects a rapidly growing desire among parents for the ability to pursue alternatives to public education. What do you say to those parents? And is there another way to address this demand for alternatives to the traditional model? And we will start with Jonah, 90 seconds.
Well, what I say to those parents is I completely understand. I just went through public school. I know how it's failing our students and what it's not teaching, and how it's focusing on things that are not relevant to people's direct lives, how it's not teaching financial education. There are many criticisms of public school that I could have, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to vote to allow public dollars to go to private education or homeschools. There was just an audit of the EFA program. 1/4 of all education dollars in the state are going to public schools, to the EFA program rather. I think that's wrong. I think that we need to be funding public education in our state. And I think in this moment where, as Peter mentioned, our budget is strained after 8 years of fiscally irresponsible leadership by the Sunoos, that we have to do everything we can to make sure that the dollars are going in the appropriate places that they should be. When this program was approved, we were told it was going to be not more than $1 million. And now we're spending 1/4 of our education dollars on this program. So I think that's wrong, and I would vote against it. And I would tell those parents, I 100% agree with your criticisms of public school. I don't think that that means that we should be taking away tax dollars in order to fund those criticisms. I think we should be making our public schools as best they can, making sure that we start teaching the truth in schools, making sure that they focus on things that are going to help people for the job training for the future. As the job market is changing, and if I had more time, I'd get into how AI in the next 5 years is going to totally shift this job market. But we need to start making sure that school is living up to what the future has for us.
Thank you. Peter.
Thank you. I really can't add an awful lot more than what Jonah said, but I don't have my phone or emails shaking over vouchers or education freedom accounts. The people I'm hearing from in Peterborough and Sharon that I represent are not in favor of anything like vouchers. So I'm not hearing the folks coming to me, at least so far, saying they really think these are a good idea for the state of New Hampshire.
Thank you. Ivy.
And in addition to all of that, I'd add that there's no oversight for where the money goes, and that's the real problem. I mean, the first problem is public dollars for public education should stay in the public school system. They definitely should not go to parochial schools because that's a clear issue constitutionally, I believe. And the lack of oversight is a huge problem. The audit that Jonah mentioned, so many of those accounts turned out to be problematic. I think it was 25%. And again, when we were first presented with the education freedom accounts, whenever that was, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I think the number was $850,000. It's only going to be $850,000. And clearly that's not the case. And so yes, I am opposed to vouchers. I am in favor of adequate funding and improvement of our schools. The public schools are the backbone of the United States. That's how we learn to live in community. And it's important that we fund it correctly and adequately. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next 4 questions will have a limit of 60 seconds. So without being dismissive of the smaller but arguably necessary regulatory reforms, which all of you are on record as favoring, such as allowing accessory dwelling units on greater numbers of residential lots, these small tweaks are not sufficient to solve a housing crisis that is at this point considered global, not just beyond our town's borders or state's borders, but our country's. What can solve this crisis, and is it possible for the New Hampshire legislature to enact such a solution? And we'll start with Ivy, 60 seconds.
Since we all know that there's something I would rather talk about than housing policy. Yeah, there are things, yes. First of all, small tweaks can help over time. They're incremental. One of my day jobs is I teach for the Incremental Development Alliance, and we talk a lot about what can you do one building at a time. And allowing buildings to be brought back into good use for housing is one way we can do that. But what we could do at the state level is we could fund infrastructure. One of the things that I am told constantly in my work as well, we would like to have more housing in our village or town center, but we can't do that because we don't have any infrastructure. So one thing that the state could do is make it easier to get infrastructure dollars, and there will be federal infrastructure dollars coming, and we need to allocate them in a better way.
Thank you. Jonah?
Well, it's an interesting question. What can the New Hampshire legislature do about what is a global crisis that is going to have to take federal response in order to address? What can Peterborough do? That's a question that we heard this spring when it came to the zoning amendments here in town, and those did not pass because Peterborough wanted local control and they wanted the ability to be able to decide what's their community looks like. So I believe that we need to fix the housing crisis, and that's why I worked very hard. Well, I can't say I worked as hard. I was just testifying. Peter Leishman on Division 1 worked extraordinarily hard to fund the New Hampshire Housing Authority to the tune of $15 million more than we were giving them already in order to address this issue. And if I'm not mistaken, that's the kind of dollars which are invested in the private planners that go to different towns in order to work with them to address their zoning codes. This is going to have to be somehow addressed through zoning. But does that mean we do statewide mandates, one size fits all for every town in the state? I didn't think so. I believed that investing those dollars to the Housing Authority and making sure that we are funding infrastructure and building new houses, doing what we can at the state was the appropriate thing that we did. And I'm looking forward to going back to do just that again.
Thank you. Peter?
We did, in fact, set aside $30 million for housing, or whether it's affordable or infrastructure improvements. However, that just really doesn't go far enough. We had several votes, not only when Ivy was in the legislature, but this past year, that would mandate certain things on communities. I do not support the state mandating different housing, whether it's affordable or workforce housing. I think that's a local issue that should be decided by local people and have the available funds, if there are any. So municipal improvements could be made to, like, say, water and sewer. I have a friend in the legislature up in New London, and she told me there are 2 projects that were approved in New London, assisted living and affordable housing. The projects were all approved, but their infrastructure would not support them. So one of the biggest problems is infrastructure, not only how many units on the lot, but whether infrastructure is there to support them. And that's going to take money from probably the state or federal government.
Thank you. As has been mentioned, each of you has served some amount of time as representative in Concord. Do you believe yourself to have a legislative philosophy? To put it another way, what in your view is the proper role of a representative from our towns in Concord? We'll start with Peter, 60 seconds.
Sure. I think the most important thing is to represent, or do the best you can to represent your constituency. Obviously, that's difficult because you have people that disagree on different issues, but you need to be available. I am available. I return phone calls. I return emails. And you also, my philosophy is you need to work with the other side. I have been all by myself. I've mentioned earlier the New Hampshire Health Protection Plan. The Republicans were in charge. I was the only Democrat on that piece of legislation, and we as Democrats were later able to say it was a bipartisan bill. So I've always prided myself in working with people, being available, and you just can't ignore the other side. And I've been in the legislature too long in the minority, so I've learned to work with the majority.
Thank you. Ivy.
Thank you. I think that, yes, you need to respond to your constituency, you need to be available. I do also think that part of what a jurisdiction does, a place does when it elects an official, is the assumption that you knew who I was and that I'm going to do the best I can to make things better for as many people as I can. And sometimes that's going to be doing something that not everyone loves, but that's part of the job, is thinking about what can I do that is going to be the greatest good for the most number of people with the abilities that I have. And I think that that's a big part of being an elected official, is thinking about who's not in the room, who's not here, who do I need to think about.
Speaker Emeriti Steve Shurtleff told me in my first day on the legislative job on November 17th, 2022, the day that the Democratic caucus met to elect its leader, in which I was honored in order to speak in favor of Speaker Emeriti Steve Shurtleff. He said to me, Jonah, you got to vote your constituents, your conscience, and then at the very end, your party. So to address your direct question, I'd say that's my legislative philosophy. I 100% agree with what's been said. You have to be respectful and patient with the other legislators, although that's more a philosophy on life than it is one in the legislature. You have to be respectful of positions. I mean, people said things to me that if I didn't have that level of respect, then I would maybe have yelled back, but I'm able to swallow the frog in my throat, to respond with respect, and as a result, we were able to get a number of bipartisan pieces of legislation through the House because we treated each other with respect, mutual respect. We knew what each other's position was. We might not disagree, we might agree, might not agree at the end of that, but we're still going to respect each other because we were able to talk to one another on a human level. So my legislative philosophy is constituents, conscience, and then party. My personal philosophy is you have to treat every human being as a human being who deserves respect, and you will get that respect back.
Thank you. So going further with this line of questioning, we've already had a few examples of this from each of you, but what do you feel you've accomplished in your time in Concord, and how will you add to those accomplishments with another term? And we'll start again with Peter.
I think my legislative record is very clear and the successes that I've been able to do, but that's working collaboratively with my colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans. I strive to bring decorum to the House. The people I know, I actually serve on the Speaker Advisory Group, which is we call SAG. There are 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans. And if someone from the public or a legislative member has a complaint, they bring it to us and we make a recommendation to the Speaker as far as discipline, and he's taken all of our unanimous recommendations so far in the last 4 years that I've served on that committee. So I think this is a good place to just say, too often in Concord, people are at each other's throats, quite literally. We need to tone it down, not only in Concord, but nationally. So that's another one of my goals, to bring more decorum and decency to the process.
Thank you, Jonah.
So as I mentioned in my opening statement, I was, I don't even know if proud is the right word. I don't have a descriptor for how enthused I am at the ability I had as a freshman legislator, 19, 20, 21 years old, to go into that building and pass 23 pieces of legislation through the House, 15 of which passed the Senate, and 12 of which were signed by the governor. And these were this was bills that were as micro as changing physical therapy rules so that a physical therapist could refer somebody to another specialist beyond the arbitrary time frame which was set in law, to as macro as addressing our education funding problem in our state. And I'm just going to speak about one bill that was personally very important to me as somebody who was fired at one point in my service industry career for having dreadlocks. I think it was an afro at the time, actually, although it's more afro locks. People in our state, whether in school or at work, if they have hair like mine or orthodox hair of some other kind, are discriminated against. And it was my pleasure to propose legislation, HB 1169, which banned hair-based discrimination in our state. And we got that legislation through the House Committee on a 17-2 basis. We got it through the Senate unanimously, and was signed by the governor in June. I want to continue education funding to end discrimination in our state and to address the clean air, clean water in our state, as I mentioned in my opening statement.
Thank you. And Ivy?
Thank you. In the 8 years that I was in the House, I think the thing that I was most successful at was changing the conversation about housing. When I first went to the State House and said, you know, we have rules that are making it really hard to build enough housing, and housing where we need it, and housing of the kind we need. And by the time I left, that conversation had changed. Unfortunately, this past two-year biennium. There were bills that came out of the Special Committee on Housing, many of which I went and testified on, that failed. And I think that having that conversation about those things with people on both sides of the aisle is really important, and a thing that I feel like I was good at. The most complimentary thing I ever overheard about myself was one of the legislative aides said to someone else, God, I hope that Ivy Van explained that, because she can explain anything to anybody. And I taught 4th grade. I'm pretty good at explaining things to people. And I enjoy explaining things to people, and I'd like to get a chance to go back and do some of that work again.
Thank you. And for the final question of this round, this is actually a repeat of a question that I asked 2 years ago, and regrettably, I'm going to be forced to ask this as long as the status quo remains. Why is the Granite State the last in New England to legalize recreational cannabis use and sale? And how can we ensure that our citizens can safely and legally get high in the future? Really, everyone agrees on this subject. How can we get this done? We'll start with Jonah.
Thank you, Chris. It's a subject that I care about a lot, being on the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. I proposed legislation this year which would have expanded the annulments provision that currently exists in the state statutes, which has people having to pay $300 in order to request a hearing to get an annulment on the charge that they had for cannabis. We have people, now cannabis charges don't happen as often in our state because it's default legal, having been an island of illegality where cops don't even want to prosecute this anymore. But there are people from 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010 who had charges that were quite severe, possession charges, who had to have an ability to be able to go back and get those charges annulled if they want to be able to get a loan, if they want to be able to get a job, if they want to be able to move forward in life. And I was very proud that that legislation passed with only 83 members of a 400-member body voting against it on House 4. And I can tell you that not every person who voted for that bill wants cannabis legalization, but they agreed that it was time that the state finally met its marker and annulled the crime of people who have cannabis charges. I was also very proud to be one of the lead representatives on cannabis legalization this year, and very disappointed when that bill was tabled by 5 votes, having passed the Senate, having passed the House. We got farther than it ever had been before. Governor Sununu promised he was going to sign it, and together with a bipartisan majority of legislators, unfortunately, Democrats and Republicans voted to table that legislation right before I could speak. So I am looking forward to going back, whether it be in the veto day session or in the next biennium, either passing the legislation that's on the table right now or reintroducing better legislation that we can actually get across the line to finally end the island illegality, which, whether or not you agree with cannabis legalization, is just ridiculous.
Thank you. Ivy.
How long have we been talking about this? This seems like a really old conversation. Yes, absolutely. We should legalize cannabis use by adults. I've been around a long time, and I'm always surprised. I don't know how we do it. I mean, and Jonah did work very hard. Lots of people have worked really hard. I mean, in the 8 years that I was in the House, I think there was a bill every year to legalize cannabis use and possession for adults, and it would pass the House and die in the Senate, or it would pass the House and the Senate, and then the governor would veto it. So the answer to the question is we have to elect Democrats up and down the ballot, because I do not see that this problem is going to be solved any other way. And we absolutely have to. Also, we could use the revenue. Remember we talked about that earlier, about how we are losing taxes because we've cut various taxes? We could use some cannabis money.
Thank you. Peter.
So the legislation would have passed this year, but unfortunately some of the sponsors made it too complicated, and the governor's involvement made it even more difficult. Those of you who follow the matter, the Senate proposed that the state liquor stores provide the sale of, that's what a lot of people did, laugh or shake their heads. I personally have seen over the years that the Liquor Commission is not well run. They're losing money now. They're not meeting plan as far as revenue. So the last thing we wanted to do is have the Liquor Commission oversee the sale of cannabis. And that really is what killed it as far as the money necessary for cannabis. It would take almost 2 years to get the program established and millions of dollars to do that. So there's a lot of hurdles. We're obviously, as you mentioned in your question, the last state in New England, but because of that, we're not going to pick up a lot of sales either because people have gotten used to going across to Massachusetts, Vermont, and Maine. So the revenue forecasts that we thought we'd see, they're not going to be there either because it's legal in all the other states. But I'm sure there'll be legislation again this year to support the legalization of marijuana, and if a plan comes forward that makes a private sale out of it and not controlled by the Liquor Commission, just as medical marijuana is done not by the Liquor Commission but private business, I think it may succeed.
Thank you. And Jonah, you'd like 30 seconds?
Yeah, I just wanted to say really quickly that it wasn't Liquor Commission run stores. We were able to change that at the very end. It was state agency stores, which at the very end would be licensed and private license. So we were able to get legislation that didn't fail necessarily because of the Republicans. We had an interesting purple majority on it, libertarians who believe that everything should be everything, and Democrats who know how unjust the system is right now for people who are smoking a plant, voted to advance the legislation, which had gotten farther than it had been in 20 years, and unfortunately, Democrats who wanted it to be perfect voted against it. Had Democrats who understood that this was a 20-year-long fight that we finally have an opportunity to take a step forward on, we would have passed that legislation.
For our next round, we have one question specifically tailored for each of you. You'll have 60 seconds to answer your question, and if your opponents wish, they may indicate with the paddle that they wish to respond, and they'll have 30 seconds. Peter, if re-elected, this will be your 13th term. Is there a line past which you would say, enough is enough, I've served and accomplished enough, and it's time to step back and let others come forward to serve?
I haven't gotten there yet. But certainly I'll recognize, I hope, to the point we have a lot of legislators up there that have served a lot longer than I have. The ranking member of the Finance Committee, I think she's been there over 40 years and still has a lot of spunk. So as soon as I am told by someone, either my wife or my daughter, that it's enough, or the public, I would step aside. But I hope to at least serve one more term.
Thank you, Peter. Our next question is for Jonah. Jonah, there are some in this town who claim that you are soft on transgender rights, soft on gun control, and generally out of step with today's Democratic Party. Do you agree with this assessment, and how do you respond to these accusations?
Well, I saw that letter to the editor on Tuesday that said that I was out of step with the modern Democratic Party. If listening to me, I don't think that I'm out of step with the Democratic Party. It was the one who proposed the education funding bill, which Democrats all across the state care about. I was the one that proposed that we address annulments, finally, legalization, finally, ending hair-based discrimination, finally, and much more. We got lobbyists to report their income. To address your question directly, am I soft on transgender rights? I voted to protect transgenders from discrimination in our state that same day. The vote you're referring to, one vote, was a vote to not allow surgery for people under the age of 18, cosmetic sex transition surgery. We can have differences of opinion on that issue. I don't believe in banning cosmetic surgeries for adults. If you're an adult, you have the right to do what you want to do. But when you're under the age of 18, and the state of New Hampshire has determined that we're not allowing you to get tattoos, we're not allowing you to drink, we're not allowing you to smoke, we're not allowing you to drive a car until you're 16, I mean, we understand and recognize that children don't have the same brain capacity as adults. And that is why I voted for an amendment which would have, and I know I'm going over my time here, but it was a long question. That's why I voted for an amendment which took out harmful provisions from legislation which would have said that we are not allowed to talk about gender in schools, which said that we're not allowed to have treatment for transgenders, including therapy. That's what I took out of that bill and left it a ban on sex transition surgery, which I do support. Now, people threatened my death over that. People said that I wouldn't be allowed to go into Keene because of that. They said that they would punch me because of that. I had to move my seat in the legislature because of it. People bullied me constantly for 2 years because of it. Now I'll get to the gun votes. I voted against legislation, and I have them right here. If you want to see them, they're all annotated because it's my committee bills that I have in my stockroom. But each of these bills were either poorly written, unenforceable, or not workable for the state of New Hampshire. I supported gun safety legislation like HB 1711, which improved the data transfer between people. If you're involuntarily committed, then you lose your gun rights. And the state of New Hampshire wasn't sending that data to the next database. And you know what happened? Somebody got a gun and they went to the Concord Hospital and they shot somebody. We passed legislation to address that. I stood up for gun rights when the legislation was written correctly. I'm very disappointed that this primarily has to be about my record as if I've not stood up. I was deliberate on legislation, and I stand by that. Turn down. Mic is turned down.
Please, can you hear?
I think it's turned down. I have to. I'll hold it right next.
All right, this question is for Ivy. Ivy, you were quoted in the Keene Sentinel stating that certain housing mandates are needed at the state level because locals, when given the opportunity to vote directly on them, will vote against them at town meeting. Why do you feel that it is right, as chosen representative of Peterborough and Sharon, to act directly against the expressed and explicit will of the voters of Peterborough and Sharon?
I knew that you were going to ask me that, and the answer is there's no reason for a particular town to take a step that they feel is going to expose them to housing that is different than what they have now. I've been watching this now. The first article I wrote for the Milford Cabinet in 1983 was about the fact that road workers in Amherst, New Hampshire could not afford to live in Amherst. And the reason that they couldn't afford to live in Amherst was because they had passed zoning ordinances that required 3 and 5 and 7 acre lots. So the reason that I think that this has to be done at the state level is that it is unreasonable to expect towns to do it individually. This is the work I do all the time, and it is incredibly hard, and understandably so. And just as we do not allow towns to have open pit burning at their dumps, or we don't allow towns to make rules that say you can build a house on pilings in the river or on the lake edge, there are some things that are bigger than individual towns. And so yes, I do think that there are some things that need to be changed at the state level. And we've seen this in other states, that other states who have made changes, things like allowing fourplexes, the thing that I've talked about for years, have seen an improvement in their housing situation, and they have not seen terrible outcomes from it. And I think that that's why I'm willing to say, yes, we need to do this as a state.
Peter, 30 seconds to respond.
Yeah, actually, like to respond to what Jonah said. I've had the privilege of actually riding with Jonah many days up to Concord. After reading the letter to the editor on Tuesday, I thought, well, I'll look in up and see what Jonah's ranking was as far as supporting democratic values, as far as where he stands with Citizens Count. And I printed the document up. Jonah showed scored his partisan unity vote percentage was 80%. Mine was 90%. You know, Jonah works very hard. I have been completely impressed by how articulate he is, the respect he's gained by both Democrats and Republicans in the House. And the other thing, Jonah and I show up. One of the things, our biggest problem in Concord is, I hate to say it, Democrats that don't show up. We lost the voucher bill vote, I think by 1 vote. It could have been killed, but we lost it by 1 vote because we often average 12 to 15 Democrats that don't show up. So Jonah shows up, he's there, and and at least 80% of those issues that are Democratic, he's there. So I think we should give him a little slack.
Sure. 30 seconds, Joe.
I just want to say, Peter, and I don't think my mic is turned up all the way, so I have to speak a little bit louder, but Peter Leishman has been one of the greatest mentors that you could ask for in serving as a freshman legislator. Getting to show you the ropes around the Finance Committee, driving up and getting to have some fun in what we call the sandbox. It makes the snake's den that is the legislature a lot easier to be able to go over to somebody who knows it as well as Peter does and say that. So the fact that he's willing to, that means a lot to me, Peter. I thank you very much. I'm definitely very much so looking forward to driving up with you again.
Thank you. All right, so for the next portion of our debate, which we are affectionately calling the melee round, we have asked each candidate to come prepared with 1 question for one or both of their respective opponents. Those to whom each question is addressed will have 1 minute to respond. If a question is not directed at you, but you wish to respond in any way anyway, you will be granted 30 seconds to do so by raising your paddle. Those asking the question will also have the opportunity to chime in if desired and indicated by the paddle. We'll start with Jonah.
Well, thank you, Chris. My question to the other 2 legislators to my left here, if I am not reelected, and it is both of you who are reelected, I think about the people in Manchester who I help serve with. I do community work in Manchester. I think about the students at the schools that I've gone to speak about the legislature and getting involved, voting, and getting active in politics as a young person. And I would ask the 2 representatives to my side, if I am not reelected, which is up to the people of Peterborough and Sharon, then what will you do to continue that work, getting young people out and active in politics and making sure that we have a new base and new bench of legislators which will take us on into the next generation?
And we'll start with Ivy first, 1 minute.
Thank you. That's a really good question and an important point, and one that's really important since the state of New Hampshire is the 2nd oldest state in the United States. So the young people that we have, we need to talk to. There aren't that many of them. And an aside, I just found this out because I was looking up something else. Do you know what the median age in Peterborough is? It is 60. That's the fulcrum on the seesaw. There's half of the people are older and half are younger. But in answer to what would I do, I think visiting schools is really important. I think that when the school kids come to the State House, talking to them is really important. I think being available, letting teachers know that I'm always happy to come and visit is a really important part of that. I'd like to see us do, in Peterborough, I'd like to see us do a student voter registration drive. That's something that I'd be really interested in working on. I know the league has done it in some places, and I think that's a thing that we ought to be doing.
Thank you. Peter?
So to your question that if you don't come back, I don't know what I'll do. No, it's an excellent question, but like I said earlier, I've really come to respect Jonah, and I would probably be somewhat of a loss driving up to Concord by myself without Jonah. My wife is laughing back.
I don't know, he's still on the phone. You know that, Cheryl.
But it would certainly be a loss, but I can't imagine you not remaining an activist for all the different causes, and I would certainly encourage that to continue.
And next we'll hear Ivy's question.
So my question, and this is for both Jonah and Peter, is you've both talked a lot about the need for allowing all zoning to be locally controlled, but you do also both understand that we do have a housing issue. So my question is, if you don't want to tackle this at the state level because you think it's more appropriate to do it at the local level, how are we going to do that? Since historically, it has not been successful. And Peter, I don't care who goes first, I don't know whose turn it is.
Sounds fine.
I think someone mentioned earlier that the town did in fact vote against a number of the changes that would have increased density in the last town election. I think it's a process of education. People obviously, at least at this point, may not agree with you on the issue, so I think education perhaps is necessary to bring those people around, because again, as I said earlier, I'm not going to go against the wishes of the majority of the people I heard and have the state force a particular housing unit or commercial unit onto a community. I think that belongs in the local municipality, and again, I think perhaps up to you to really educate the people to your ideas and how we could make Peterborough more attractive to more affordable housing.
Yeah, I agree with much of what Peter just said. If people knew what the zoning code was like, and if people knew what they were voting on, the potential is there that they might vote to change their zoning code. But people don't come out for municipal elections. So I think that's part of it. We have to have leaders that understand these issues and that get out to speak to the people in order to change the local zoning codes at each town. I didn't say that I support no statewide action on housing and on zoning. I supported the millions of dollars, it was $15 extra million, a total of 30, to the Housing Authority, which is going to private planners to work with towns to address their zoning codes to get them changed. And as far as I understand, there is good work happening in Newmarket and other places across the state. I believe that if we wanted to change zoning here in town, that the people would vote to do that. The people did not vote to do that, and therefore we did not change our zoning here in town. And I'm not sure that because zoning is arcane, not understood by most people, that the solution to that would be to force through a statewide mandate. I think a more appropriate solution is to work with each town in the ways that we're working with them right now in order to craft zoning codes that work for each town instead of a one-size-fits-all option for all 228 towns in our state. So.
Thank you. And finally, Peter.
Actually, I don't have a question for either, but hopefully we could open questions up for the audience and see what the folks here have for questions.
Now that's a good representative.
And that is the final round of our debate coming next. We're going to open up our remaining time to 3 audience questions. Audience members should specify whether their question is for a specific candidate or for all candidates. And they'll have 30 seconds to answer and 30 seconds for direct responses. The other candidates have 30 seconds.
Gary.
I'm Gary Gorski.
I'll read it into the mic.
I'm Gary Gorski. My kids are at PES. They're in kindergarten. So we had another school shooting this week, which is basically par for the course now. So every day when my kids go to school, I worry. I'm sorry, I'll just stand this.
My question was just, my kids are in kindergarten at PES, and we had another school shooting this week like we have every other week. Every town for gun safety puts New Hampshire in their list of national failures on gun safety legislation. So I was pretty angry when Peter and Jonah voted with Republicans against nearly every single Democrat against the red flag laws, and that Jonah also voted against legislation to block, he voted to block legislation prohibiting guns in schools and school grounds, and to block legislation that would remove a prohibition on our law enforcement officers from enforcing federal gun laws. So I know where Jonah and Peter are from their votes. I'd like to hear how Ivy would have voted if she was there and what she's going to do.
Now I need my microphone back. I would have voted for all of those gun regulations. I think that they are the least that we can do. It's pretty clear that the problem is guns. We're the only place in the world where this happens on a regular basis. And the difference is that our gun laws are inadequate. I am not trying to I would not vote to take away guns from people. I grew up in a household that had guns. I think going to the range and shooting is probably really fun. I've never done that. I've only ever shot a tin can off of a fence post. But I do think that adequate regulation, better education about safely storing guns, and one of the things that we hardly ever talk about is the whole issue of gun suicide. A huge number of gun deaths are suicide. And the reason that gun suicides are pretty successful, because guns are good at killing people. And we don't talk enough about that. And I think that more of that work needs to be done. We need to be better about gun locks. We could require gun locks, but the NRA has argued against them, and so they've never been adopted. Those are things that we could do, and that I'd like to see us do.
So let me just say again that HB 32, which is the school safe zone bill that you're referring to, was poorly written. I stood by that. I stand by that. These bills came to my committee, so I got to hear these bills for 8 hours long. I got to read these bills. I deliberated over this for hours of my life. I did not want to vote against these bills. In fact, I asked in caucus, can we amend these bills? And do you know what my caucus leader told me? We have to throw spaghetti on the wall because this is such an important issue. I agree that gun violence is an important issue. I don't agree with throwing spaghetti on the wall as a legislative strategy. Now, I don't know if I have the time to go through each of these bills here, but very quickly I'll just say that if this legislation was the one line, which is, if this legislation was one line, which was banning the guns from the school property, which is what I asked to be amended to, I'd have no problem voting for it. But it was a 2-page convoluted piece of legislation that wasn't enforceable or unable to be written. As I wrote about in my Ledger transcript article, HB 444, prohibiting possession of firearms at a polling place, this legislation had prohibited, got messed up by the time there, it prohibited deadly weapons as defined in RSA 625.11 as banned at 100 feet within polling places with no funding mechanism in the bill or enforcement mechanism. So the assumption is that Scott Kennard would have to stand 100 feet outside the polls, check every single person for a knife on their utility belt, for a gun on their hip, or for anything that could be used as a deadly weapon, which is how it's defined in the RSAs. And it also said that anyone caught with one of those deadly weapons would have to be charged with a Class A misdemeanor, which is up to a year in jail. That's a lot of court fines. That's a lot of moolah for people ending up in jail based off of a faulty system that was unable to be enforced. Thirdly, the 106, also badly written. I could go through that as well. I was not the only Democrat that voted against these bills. I was not the only Democrat in my committee that was going to vote against these bills. I was threatened with removal from committee for bringing up my concerns about these legislation. And as a result, the other 2 members of my committee, which were going to vote with me, caved. One of them voted with me on the floor, trying to hide from their vote in committee. I'll vote with the party in committee, and then I'll vote with them on the floor. I stood up and voted against legislation which was poorly written. As I said in my original statement, I supported HB 1711, HB 59, and much more, background checks, data transfer. I support gun safety legislation. It has to be written properly. I'm not going to support legislation just because it's good for me politically in a primary. And if I lose because I voted the way that I was supposed to as a legislator, being deliberate on each piece of legislation, then so be it.
So I did vote against the 3-day waiting period because do you know that anyone can go to Maine and there's no restriction in Maine or other states to buy a gun if you can pass a federal background check, you can get a weapon in most states. Also this state, something I voted against years ago, was a law to allow people to carry a concealed weapon without a permit. So anyone in this state, whether you're sound mind or not, can carry a concealed weapon without a permit. So I was on a bill with Representative Margie Smith from Durham for background checks. That bill failed. I've always supported federal background checks, and even if the state had a background checks. But that is just not going to get through the legislature unless the legislature changes. And to conceal a weapon in this state, anyone can go into the polling place right now with a gun without a permit. So maybe many of you didn't realize that, but this is a state that guns are everywhere. We're the only state probably that doesn't have metal detectors in the State House. I sit with my colleagues that carry guns in the State House. So it's something that we really need to get our hands on, because until we address the military-style weapons, like one that was used outside of Atlanta the other day to kill 4 people, nobody should have a military-style weapon. But unfortunately, that is America, and we need a lot to change that.
Thank you. Jeff? Come up.
I work a lot in Manchester and Concord lately, and it's a lot about housing. Ivy, this can be for all 3 of you, but Ivy, you wanted to put senior housing building up the upper level of all the downtown, put senior apartments in there. No, yes, you did. And no cars walking and biking everywhere. And the town of Peterborough doesn't want little 20-acre communities out in the woods, because they wouldn't get involved in the money on the sewers and the wells. Of course, we'd have to put in driveways. But I'm tying this to Manchester, where there's a lot of housing and apartments going up, $2,000 to $2,300 a month plus utilities, no place to park a car, or if you can have a car, in the winter you're a mile away walking in the deep snow to get your car to a garage or a parking lot and back to your home. So I would like you to address how we're going to have feasible housing without putting a shaft to seniors in Peterborough.
Okay, we can start with Ivy.
Well, I don't remember saying that there was supposed to be housing for seniors on second levels, although I would support that if they meet the Fair Housing Act requirements of having an elevator. I do support having housing on second and third floors of downtown buildings. We know that downtowns are more lively and viable the more people that live within walking distances of the buildings that are down there. You get the benefits of civilization, walkable coffee. And, the ability to buy a newspaper if you still read such a thing, or a ream of copy paper if you don't. Everyone needs copy paper. So yeah, I do believe that housing should go where the people already are, where we already have infrastructure. Do we need more infrastructure? Absolutely we do. And I have always talked about the need for allowing housing to be in our neighborhoods, in our downtowns, in our villages. One of the things that I tell people in my daily job is, you live in a little town of 800 people. Lean into your village. Would you like to have a general store? You got to have enough people to support that general store. And in terms of the cost of housing, it is impossible to produce below market rate housing without subsidy. It just is. It's a fact. I'm happy to give you all the backup on that if you want to hear it later. But for right now, let's just accept that. So if we want housing that is affordable to people making 30% of area median income, 50%, 60%, 80%, which is the workforce cutoff for purchase, we are going to have to do 2 things, and I think we're going to have to do both of them. One of them is allow historically appropriate density, and by that I mean most of the towns in New England are smaller, have fewer people than they used to have. We could have more housing without becoming Manhattan. We don't have to do that. We do not. The other thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to buckle up and put money into building housing. And that's the only way that we're going to solve this problem. So that's my answer for that.
I agree with Ivy, we're going to need to put money into building housing. I wanted to mention to your point, Kath, about the prices. That BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, three Wall Street firms, own $23 trillion worth of assets right now. That includes single-family homes, that includes houses all across this country. The market is being artificially risen by corporations which are monopolizing it right now. And unfortunately, we don't have antitrust powers at the state level. If we did, then we'd be able to address these multinational corporations which are buying up housing stock here in the United States and across the world, which are keeping us from being able to have long-term rentals, which are keeping us from being able to have single-family starter homes that are affordable for young people trying to start a family. And it's keeping our state and our nation locked into artificial stagnation. Until that artificial stagnation is released by a reignition of the market, then we're going to have, even if we get everything with zoning done, everything else done, we're still going to have problems with prices and affordability. So we can build as many houses and change the zoning code and develop as much land as we have, but until we address the affordability issue and the issue of the market, which is, as was mentioned in the original answer or the question, a global and national issue, then we're not going to be able to get forward as a nation. And that's much beyond a constituency of 7,000 people, absolutely.
You're good on that one, Peter? All right, we have time for one more. I see Tyler Ward in the back.
Hi guys. I want to say I appreciate your service and your commitment to all of us, and I share 99% of your values, and I really appreciate you're all committed to serving. I do want to point out or ask for a commitment from Jonah and Peter to educate themselves better on transgender rights and transgender people and transgender lives and the effects that legislation has on people starting at the childhood age. Legislation leads to bullying because people feel they're afraid to be who they are. As a father of a transgender child, okay, my kid is alive today because they were able to find their true self as an adult. We didn't know why they wanted to kill themselves as a young person, but they couldn't get the counseling, couldn't find it in New Hampshire, okay? But more importantly, all this legislation coming down the pike, it's all the same. It's meant to intimidate. The legislation that the two of you voted on may have sounded okay to you because of justification, but their sole purpose was to intimidate transgender people, okay? And the instances that those pieces of legislation would address are virtually non-existent in New Hampshire. And I'm going to reiterate, from the sound of it and the applause to Jonah's answer about one particular piece of legislation, it seems like a lot of people aren't educated on the efforts to put transgender people out of existence. And so I'm asking, and I've come down to one issue. I'm a one-issue voter this Tuesday. Who can commit to? Oh, and by the way, your everybody's favorite governor, thank guy's leaving, used the bipartisan moniker about the transgender legislation that he just recently passed. So this is anti-transgender legislation. Okay, so I'm looking for a commitment and a statement right now from the three of you who will educate themselves in this next term to just understand where that legislation is coming from, and that the idea that gender dysmorphia and transgender surgery in no way equates to a tattoo, for crying out loud. commit to understanding that at an early age when kids know who they are. Are you going to say that about any LGBTQ person? They don't know who they are at a young age? I'm sorry, I'm swinging my arm. I'm passionate about this. And secondly, work on legislation to overturn the few that were actually passed. Who will commit here tonight? Thank you.
Jonah.
Please don't double down on what you said to me, or I don't want to hear about what you said in the past. I want to hear going forward. Will you educate? Will you educate yourself, and will you commit to overturning this? That's it.
I voted against legislation which would have discriminated against transgender
That's
people.
not what I'm asking about.
Miami will answer the question.
I'm sorry, but you need to, thank you.
Thank you. I voted against legislation which would have reauthorized conversion therapy and discrimination for transgender individuals. The vote that Tyler is referring to was a vote for an amendment which took out provisions of a bill which said we wouldn't be able to discuss this issue in school. It said that it would ban therapy and HRT, which are what we're told only young people do. There's no surgery for young people, it's only HRT and therapy, which is not the case. There is cases of surgery. And in terms of the point that I was uneducated on this issue, I guess I would point you to the Cass report, to what England just did, to the Cass report, to what the United Kingdom just did. The National Health Service just banned puberty blockers and surgery for minors. We did not ban puberty blockers for minors. We did not ban HRT for minors. This issue has been addressed by the medical community, and the Biden administration also just banned surgery as well via the administrative rules. It is true. And I stand by the fact that I think people under the age of 18 can't make the decision as to whether or not they want to remove their sex organs. I stand by that. That has nothing to do with my votes on transgender rights. It has nothing to do with the Republicans' efforts to take away transgender rights in this state. I stand by my vote because it was a vote based on months worth of education that I was doing on that issue. I was educated. I did speak to the transgender community. I continue to speak to the transgender community. I voted on that issue as a result of what I saw coming out of England, coming out of the United States, coming out of medical communities across the world, which have said that it's time to put a pause on surgery for minors.
We'll go with Ivy.
I do commit myself to finding out as much as I can about transgender issues before I were ever to vote on any bill that affects transgender people, LGBTQ people, bodily autonomy for women, bodily autonomy. If you don't own your own body, what do you own? In the famous words, and now I've lost it, you know who I mean. It's, oh gosh. In any case, yes, I do commit myself to finding out, to talking to people, to learning as much as I can before I take a vote. And I do consider bodily autonomy to be an inalienable human right.
Peter.
Thank you. So I've always supported trans rights. I did vote against the bill that would allow anyone under 18 years old to have sex-changing surgery. I'm sorry. My daughter actually does dermatology work. I talked to her quite extensively about this, and she said, you know, something like this, Dad, is really a stretch because I have to get permission from the parents for any sort of operation if they're under 18 years old. So to me, allowing anyone under 18 years old to have life-changing surgery was kind of a stretch. But I've talked to Tyler a lot about this. We've exchanged some emails. I'll certainly keep myself open. The process of being in the legislature has always been a learning experience, and I certainly don't shut the door on learning more about the issue. Thanks.
Thank you. And before we wrap for the evening, we have invited all candidates to make 60-second closing remarks. And we will begin tonight with Ivy.
Okay. Well, you've now, if you didn't already know, you now know more about me than you did before. I work hard. I do my homework. I think this is an important job. It's not an easy job. It's not a well-paid job. But there are some things that we have to do collectively. And serving in the State House allows us to do things as a society, as the state of New Hampshire, collectively. And my feeling about getting elected to any position is that if you get elected, your job when you're elected is to do the best you can for the most people you can, as I said earlier. And if that means that you don't get reelected, which has happened to me, then it's still the right thing to do. If you get elected, you should burn up whatever little tiny bit of political capital you have doing the best you can. And that's what I promise to do if I get to go back to Concord. Thanks.
Thank you. Peter.
Jonah is the last one. So I take my job very seriously in the legislature. I have for the terms that I've been there. I oversee a $15 billion budget serving on the Finance Committee. I strive very hard to treat everybody equally with respect out there, not only my colleagues, but the citizens of Peterborough and Sharon. I would love the opportunity to go back again and serve as long as I'm able, and as long as you folks send me back, I would certainly appreciate your support and vote. Thank you.
I have been up in the legislature 5 days a week, January to June, in the last 2 years that I have served in this legislature. And I 100% agree with what has been said. You are elected to the legislature for 2 years. You don't get a guaranteed next term. And you have to do everything you can in your ability in that 2 years to get the work done. And I can say confidently, I got the work done in the last 2 years. People told me to go up there for education funding. I went up there for education funding. People told me to go up there and fight discrimination. I went up there and I fought discrimination. People told me to go up there and fight for clean air, clean water, and that's exactly what I did. I'm going to go back in the next 2 years and be a leader in the House of Representatives because that's what the House is looking for. Because people have been disorganized and unorganized for a long time. We have members that agree on each issue. But the coordination and the organization is not there. We need a Democratic Party that's going to restore the state of New Hampshire to its fullest potential. And that's exactly what I'm planning on doing in my next 2 years in the legislature. And I have to say, if I lose because I stood up on what I believed on in my own form of integrity, then so be it. Because at least I'll be able to wake up on September 11th confident in how I voted and able to move forward in this state. I know for a fact that we need young people back in office. I don't like to say much because I don't like to admit how young I am. But we need young people in office. When I go to the different schools, when I talk to children, I hear their apathy.
We need women too.
We absolutely need women too. We definitely do. We have a lot of great women up in the legislature. We need black people, we need women, we need young people, we need different voices in the legislature so that it's not just rich, retired people who are representing us up in Concord. And whether I take hard votes, whether I take easy popular votes, I'm up there voting. I didn't miss a session day, I didn't miss a committee day, and I'm going to do that again in the next 2 years. We're going to save the state of New Hampshire from the right-wing forces which are trying to destroy it. That is what I wake up doing every day. That is what I will continue to wake up doing. And whether or not I'm reelected, I'll be in the legislature fighting for those values in office. Thank you.
All right, that brings us to the end of our debate. My friends, my residents of Peterborough and Sharon, my countrymen, I thank you all for coming out and making this a very lively debate. Special thanks to Corinne for doing double duty on time, which is not easy, as well as library director. Thank you to all of the staff at the library, and thanks especially to our 3 candidates, Ivy, Peter, and Jonah. Thank you all.